What's up everybody, welcome to what is probably going to be the largest and longest video that I've ever made. So there hasn't been a whole lot of new and interesting things lately that I've wanted to test for as far as combos go. But what I did want to do was, I thought it would be really cool to make like a full comprehensive combo guide for the Nationals format. For people that will be attending Nationals and may not know what every deck does. So what we're going to be doing is going over the most simple, basic, bare bones combos for, you know, every tier 1, 1.5, tier 2, even some rogue decks as well. All of the decks that you would expect to see at the NA North American Nationals. And I'm just going to put out a little disclaimer here first that I am not an expert on a lot of these decks. I've never actually played a lot of these decks, so a lot of the information in this video will be from you know, YouTube videos that I've watched or any other kind of guides that I've looked at. So if there's something that I get, you know, just a little bit wrong or completely wrong, then feel free to drop a comment. I would like to hear information from you, and I'm sure other people in the comments would like to as well. So let's start off. I'm going to start off with all of the different versions of Spright, because I think Spright is looking to be a very, very popular deck in this upcoming month or so. So we're going to cover all these variations, and a lot of them will kind of be a little similar. So let's start with Live Twin Spright. So this will be like Live Twin stuff without Runick. Let's just go. So we start with our normal summon Lilla. Now if this has no other, if we summon this and we have no other monsters on the field, we can summon a Kiss a Kill monster from the deck, which gets us out the Kiss a Kill Frost. Next, we can summon the Spright Blue to add Jet. You can also do this exact same combo if you draw Jet instead of Blue. You just go pretty much in the opposite order as you go here. Like you go Spright into Starter into Blue instead of Blue into Jet into Starter. Next, we're going to go ahead and make the Gigantic with the Blue and the Lilla. Because we want to actually keep the Kiss a Kill on field to make the Kiss a Kill Link 2 later on. Next, we can go ahead and use Gigantic to summon the Spright Red. So now we can no longer be Nibiru'd here because of Gigantic's effect, and we have hand trap protection with Red. So from here on out, we're pretty much protected. So if you play against this deck, you're gonna have to probably drop all of your hand traps pretty early, because once they start getting this set up, there's no hand trapping this anymore, except for maybe Imperm, but that can be, you know, stopped with Carrot, with Starter into Carrot, things like that. So we're going to grab the Starter and we're going to link off the Jet and the Kiss a Kill for the Evil Twin Kiss a Kill. Now we can bring back the Lilla from grave, link summon the Evil Twin Lilla, and bring back the Kiss a Kill. Now when this is summoned and we control the Lilla, we get to draw a card, so this deck just gets a free plus on turn 1. Next we can Starter for the Carrot. Now if they already have access to Carrot, you might see a Spright Smasher's Search instead, which is extra removal. Finally, you can summon out this Carrot a lot earlier if you are worried about Imperm. Next, we're going to link off these two for the Kiss a Kill once again, and this is going to set up the Lilla pop on the opponent's turn. Now, what's really cool about this setup is that if we use Kiss a Kill to bring back Lilla, and then just say like pop any random card, we now have the Red and the Carrot on the field, that both have their negates. And what you can do is you can use one of them, tributing Gigantic, which will give the red not only the negate, but since we tributed a Xyz monster, it will also destroy the monster that we negated. And for the other negate, what you can do is tribute the Kiss-a-Kill, so that you can then use Lila effect, reborn the Kiss-a-Kill to draw an extra card from the deck. So you can kind of loop the Lila and the Kiss-a-Kill over and over again for your negation effects, while also just popping cards and drawing cards. So it's a really strong advantage engine that this deck sets up really easily. And that's pretty much the whole gist of Live Twin Spright. As far as Runick goes, basically the only difference is that they summon Hugin, and they use Hugin as link material or Xyz material or whatever. And then they have the Fountain and all the Runick spells. So it doesn't really like change the combo a whole lot. It just gives them even more advantage and even more interaction with the Runick spells. So I won't really be showing the Runick combos with the Live Twin stuff, because it's just pretty straightforward and, you know, not really all that different than what I'm showing you right now. So as far as Live Twin Spright goes, the deck has a lot of quick effect spot removal with Lila and Smashers. Both of these cards, Lila obviously is very easy to make. Smashers is highly searchable. Smashers does not target. It's a non-targeting banish, so it is extremely powerful. The deck also draws a ton of cards, right? You saw that we drew one card on our turn. It also has access to draw one card on the opponent's turn with the Evil Twin, but it also has the Kiss-a-Kill Frost in the grave, that whenever your opponent draws or adds a card from deck to hand, you get to draw another card. So it's not impossible for the opponent to draw upwards of 3 cards between their first turn and your turn, which means you're going to have to look out for a lot of hand traps, not just interaction on the board. And obviously the deck does have the monster and spell and trap negates with the red and carrot, so things like Evenly not always going to be as effective against this deck as maybe some other things. And of course it is a Spright deck, so you gotta look out for the Ibly lock. Unfortunately this card is still legal. I was hoping it would get hit on the ban list. And with, you know, the rising popularity of Spright variants, I would say that Ibly is something that you should probably have an answer to. That remains to be seen, I think, but if you have the extra deck space, it probably doesn't hurt to just throw a Lingaribo in there and call it a day. The deck has tons of non-engine space, and it draws a lot of cards. So in addition to this board, I would expect maybe about roughly 3 hand traps. 2 to 3 hand traps if they got a good opening hand and good draws. Next up we have Melffy Spright. This is a secondary variation of Spright that has a few different key pieces of interaction, but so it's up to personal preference which one you like better. So we'll show you what this one can do compared to the Live Twin. This one has starters that aren't just Spright cards. For example, there is a 1-card combo with Nimble Beaver that gets you your full board. So I'm going to be showing you the Nimble Beaver 1-card combo, and obviously any other Sprites in hand is just a bonus compared to what this board puts up off this 1 card. So we're going to go ahead and normal summon the Beaver, summon out the Angler, and this will get us the Gigantic Spright. Next we can go ahead and use Gigantic to summon Blue. Blue will get Jet. Special Jet, add the Double Cross. What we can do now is we can actually go for a Sprint here. Sprint is going to dump Nimble Angler, which is when it is sent from the hand or deck to the graveyard, you can special summon up to 2 level 3 or lower nimble monsters from your deck. Now, Spright Sprind in a position like this is actually a pretty big choke point if the opponent doesn't have good follow-up, because this card on its own puts up 2 monsters on board that they use for the Melffy line. So if you have any piece of interaction for the Sprind, it's very likely you can cut them off of their whole Melffy engine. So I'm not a huge fan of how this interaction works, but I can't argue against its, power. So what we can do is summon 2 nimble beavers, and what's important about these is that they are both beasts, which means we can make the Melffy of the Forest. Well, actually, Melffy of the Forest doesn't require beasts. Never mind. Yeah, so we can just make the Melffy of the Forest. And what this can do is it can detach a material to add a Melffy card from deck to hand, so we're going to grab the Caddy. So we can set our double cross, and we can go to the end phase, which will trigger the Caddy to special summon. Now, this might not look too impressive, but there is a lot of interaction here. Number 1, you might forget that Sprind actually has an interruption, which is, let's see. If another monster is special summoned while this card is on the field, you can detach 1 material from an Xyz you control, target a monster on the field, return it to the hand. And since we end on the Gigantic and the Melffy of the Forest, we can detach material from either of these to just bounce a card, which is very nice. We also have the Caddy, which will tag out into our Melffy combo to make a synchro. Also, Melffy of the Forest is that when we do use the Caddy effect to return to hand, the Melffy of the Forest will trigger on a new chain, which can target a face-up monster your opponent controls. It cannot attack, and its effects are negated. So it's basically a monster negate that if you have to time it correctly in order to actually get the negate properly, but it is a negate nonetheless. And of course, this was the 1-card combo, so any other sprites you opened, you're probably going to have a red or a carrot here as well, which contribute either of these for negation. And the double cross. So let me actually show you what the Melffy cards do. So let's say our opponent, summons a monster. This will let us use the Caddy effect to return to hand and add a Penny to hand. And Penny has a quick effect that at any point during our opponent's turn, if a beast was returned to the hand, you can special summon this card, then synchro summon using this card and Melffys you control and in your hand. So we get to summon it out, and we get to synchro 4 into either Herald of the Arclight or Merry Melffys. Now, Merry Melffys, if it is special summoned, you can target a face-up monster on the field and return it to the hand. So this is another bounce in addition to the Sprind. But you can also make Herald of the Arclight, which is just a Omni negate. So if you don't have access to red or carrot, you can still put up a negate. And what's super interesting about the Arclight is that you can actually reborn it with the double cross, which is just absolutely stupid. So you contribute the Arclight to negate a card, reborn it with the double cross, summoning it to the Sprind arrow, and then you get another negate because Herald isn't once per turn. So it's a very versatile end board. It can do a lot of different things, which I think gives it a bit of an advantage over Live Twin Spright, because Live Twin Spright is a little telegraphed in its interaction, but this deck can do a lot of crazy stuff, which I think kind of puts it kind of separates itself from Live Twin in that way. So in terms of the end board, you have to be a lot more worried about the monster negate from Melffy of the Forest and the quick bounce from Penny. It's a different type of interaction than Live Twin. It also has the potential to put up the 2 Omni negates with Herald and Double Cross. which if your deck just hard loses to negate and destroys, like if your deck really needs board presence, having your monsters destroyed by the Herald can be pretty detrimental. Of course, the generic negation with red and carrot, and still, as always, gotta watch out for that Ibly. Now, since this deck doesn't really draw a whole bunch of cards like the Live Twin version, you can probably expect a little bit less hand traps from this deck on the draw. The deck still has tons of non-engine access, so, you know, you're gonna have to play through maybe this entire board and about maybe 2 or 3 hand traps as well. Next up, we have Runick Fur-Hire, which, if you don't know what this deck does, I'm with you. It took me a while to understand, but it's actually quite simple. Now this combo doesn't necessarily require Spright monsters, but this deck does play Spright cards, so I'm kind of lumping it in together with all the other Spright variants. So the typical starting hand you want from this deck is, you know, any Runick spell to summon Hugin, of course, but also Rex, and the deck plays a few ways to get to Rex, because it's a dinosaur. You can just play Fossil Dig. So the main combo line is any Runick spell plus Rex. So it doesn't necessarily require Sprites, but you should know that this deck does play a little bit of Spright monsters. So we're going to go ahead and activate whatever our Runick spell is to get Hugin, which is going to pitch a card to add the Fountain. So already you should be expecting Runick spells here with just the Fountain on the board. Next we can summon out the Rex. Now what this is going to do is going to add the Rookie Fur-Hire, which can tribute a monster for cost, special summon a Fur-Hire from your hand or deck whose level is 1 higher or 1 lower than the attributed monster. Now this works really well with Hugin because it's a level 2, which means we can tribute the Hugin to summon Beat, which is a level 3. Next we're going to make the Donner, and we're going to use Donner Effect, which will tribute a monster, special summon a monster Fur-Hire with a different name. Then if you tribute a link, you can summon one more. So we have 2 Fur-Hires in our graveyard, and now this gets a little finicky. You want... So the wording on Donner is that it is a... So you special summon the first monster, right? And then it has a then right here. This then is really important. Then if you tributed a link monster, you can special summon one more. So you have to summon the Beat as the first monster in order to get its effect, right? Because if a monster Fur-Hire is special summoned while you control this monster, this has to successfully summon first, and then the Donner says then if you tribute a link, you can special summon another, right? So the Beat has to be summoned first so that you can then summon the Rex, which will trigger Beat because it was already on the field. So if your opponent summons Rex first and then Beat, they cannot use Beat effect, and that's something that you need to look out for. Somebody who's maybe new to this deck might not really know that. It's just an absolutely stupid ruling, but that's Yu-Gi-Oh, baby. Alright, so now we get to use the Beat effect to search the Rafal. Then we can use Beat effect to special a Fur-Hire from hand, which is going to grab us the Rafal. And Rafal, when it's summoned, we can excavate the top of our deck equal to the number of Fur-Hires with different names. So basically you just get to look at the top 2 cards of the deck here and add whatever. Your opponent's probably going to add a Runick spell or a Spright monster. Next we can link all 3 of these off for the Folgo. So Folgo, when it's summoned, is going to summon a Fur-Hire from the deck, so we're going to get Donpa here. And Donpa's effect is that if a Fur-Hire monster is special summoned, while you control this card, you can target a face-up card on the field and destroy it. So that's pretty important. So this is just the general Fur-Hire setup. Your opponent does have the runic spells, so they can, you know, for example, if they do have something like Tip as well, they can draw a couple more cards during their turn. But the main draw of this deck, get it? Draw? Is that you're going to be drawing a shit ton of cards during your opponent's turn. Because what we can do is we can banish Rex to summon a... during the main phase, you can banish the Rex if you control a Fur-Hire to summon the Rafal from the grave, which will then excavate more cards, but also trigger the Donpa to destroy a monster. Right, so we get to excavate and add even more cards, so we're already up +2, just from the Fur-Hire engine, and then once a monster is popped, this will then trigger Fulgo, that if a card your opponent controls is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can draw 1 card. Then, if you control 3 or more Fur-Hires with different names, you can draw 2 additional cards. So basically, we're just gonna get to draw 3. So, we're now +5, and we haven't even used, like, any of our Runick Fountain activations yet. So, you can see I just, as a joke, I just added, like, 5 Runick spells to hand. So, this is what this deck does. It has like this very simple setup into the Fur-Hires. Oh, I should also mention that Rafal is a monster negate. Yeah, so I should also mention that this is also just a negate. In addition to going, you know, drawing 5 cards, Fountain can draw you even more cards. And it's very hard to interact with this deck because a lot of the interaction is going to come from the hand with the Runick cards. And, you know, don't even get me started on the sprites. You know, you might have like a Gin Buster with a Smashers, you know, it's just, this deck has tons and tons of interaction coming from all different places, and it's very hard to keep track of. So this is a deck that I think you need to be prepared for. Not having experience against this deck, I think, is what makes this deck good. That being said, even if you do know how to play against this deck really well, it's still just extremely strong, and you probably might get blown out anyway. So, just to recap real quick, we have tons of draw power. Fulgo draws 3. We have Rafal that can basically Pot of Prosperity every turn. You have Runick Fountain, which can draw you maybe 2 or 3 cards every turn. Right? So you're just drawing a ton of cards. It is really hard to out-advantage this deck and out-grind this deck. The Runick cards give this deck pretty good matchups across the board. Right? It has Monster Negation, it has Monster Destruction. It even has Spell and Trap Destruction with Runick Destruction. So, you know, trying to, like, floodgate your opponent out of the game with, like, a skill drain or something, not really gonna be helping you out. And of course, there's the entire Sprite sub-engine, which gives you more bodies, more negates, just more everything. The downside of this deck, though, is that it really doesn't have space for anything other than your 3 engines. But the deck already has so many tools that doesn't really need that non-engine space. And the deck used to play Gamma, but that's been limited, so I don't think they play Gamma anymore. So don't expect many hand traps at all, if any. But it's not unreasonable to expect something like an evenly matched in games 2 or 3. Alright, let's just go ahead and get this one out of the way. It's Kashtira. It's the same old Kashtira you know and love. Special Unicorn. Add Theosis. Theosis summon Fenrir. Fenrir effect, add Rise Heart. Rise Heart summon. Effect, banish whatever the fuck. And then you make a Rise Heart. Yeah, that's Kashtira. The deck has tons of ways to make this card. Just be aware that Unicorn is the 1-card combo. Anything else other than Unicorn is probably going to be a 2-card combo. yeah, it's just Macrocosmos, and it banishes a card, quick effect. Very cool. On the other hand, however, there is that the Raidraptor version of this deck running around that I feel like I also wanted to talk about for a little bit. It's a pretty simple combo. You can do it with just your Kashtira engine, but it puts up a Rise Heart with a monster negate as well as a spell negate. So, you know, it's a little bit more interesting than just a standard Kashtira board, but not by much. So it's going to be starting about the same way as you would expect, except we're going to make a Shangri-Era here before the Arise Heart, so that off the Arise Heart you can banish Big Bang to make him level 7, and then Big Bang will summon one of the materials that is attached to the Shangri-Era, so we just get another body on the board here in order to make a rank 7 for Arsenal Falcon. Now Arsenal Falcon, once per turn, detach a material, special summon a level 4 winged beast from the deck. So we're going to summon out the Tribute Lanius. Now Tribute Lanius is going to dump a Raidraptor, so we're going to send Raider's Wing. Then we can go ahead and detach a material from the Arsenal Falcon to summon back the Raider's Wing from the graveyard. Next we're going to overlay our 2 rank 7s for Utopic Future, and then we can use our 2 level 4s to make Galaxy Photon Dragon. So this will add Eternal Galaxy, so this will basically give us access to the Hope Harbinger on our opponent's turn. Now I believe for this combo you do need 1 extra extender just to put a Kashtira on board to make the Arise Heart. There might be some really jank way of doing it another way, but let's be honest, your opponent's going to have Birth or Scareclaw, probably. So this is not completely out of the realm of possibility. If they have Scareclaw, they can do something like banish Theosis to add back a banished Kashtira card like Big Bang before making the Arise Heart. So now during our opponent's turn, during the draw phase, we can just go ahead and shotgun the Galaxy to get the Hope Harbinger. This will make sure that we can't be like lightning stormed or something when it gets to our opponent's main phase. And that's about it as far as the Raidraptor stuff goes. Oh, this will also put an additional material on the Arise Heart. One more material closer to the banish effect. So Hope Harbinger is a spell negate, Utopic Future, can't be destroyed by battle or card effects, and is a monster negate and steals that monster. And then Arise Heart is just Arise Heart. You know, and potentially also the Big Bang is something you might have to look out for too. If your opponent starts popping off too much through all of your interruption, just expect to get your board wiped a little bit. So Kashtira, it's got Arise Heart, this fucking asshole. The deck has a ton of grind game still. Birth is still at 3. People are now playing preparations in order to get back their Arise Heart, since it's now limited. So if it gets like sent to grave or whatever, they can banish it with like Scareclaw and then summon it back with preparations. So the deck now has ways to recycle. Well, it always had ways to recycle it, but now they have to, you know, their game plan has to resolve around being able to recycle it. The deck also plays a lot of power spells, so things like Tactics, Enemy Controller is decently popular, Forbidden Lance is also pretty popular in this deck. Some people also play Thrust. In addition to some hand traps, the deck also has a lot of power spells to protect the Arise Heart. The deck can also just side in Ibli since it doesn't use the normal summon, so that's also another thing you have to look out for. I don't think it's that popular anymore because you can't rip your opponent's extra deck with Diablosis to get rid of the Linger Rebo. You don't want to be caught off guard getting Iblied, so keep an eye out for that. So it's a 1 to 2 card combo deck, so you should expect maybe 2 to 3 hand traps and or non-engine pieces of interaction. Alright, let's talk about Labrynth for a little bit. Specifically the Furniture Labrynth version, because this deck does play a little bit more of a combo style. So there are some combos with this deck that you need to look out for if you're playing against Furniture. One of them is going to be the double Handloop, which is actually quite easy to do. There are multiple hand combinations that get you there. One of them being Ariana plus Clock, or Ariana plus Big Welcome, or Ariana plus Furniture, or, you know, you get the idea. There's a lot of hands that do it. So it's something that I personally like to do because it gives you deck knowledge on turn 1, which can be very nice. So how does it work? We're going to normal Ariana to get our Big Welcome. So basically any way to get these 3 cards is going to do the Handloop. So what we can do now is activate the Clock. This will make it so that we can activate a normal trap card the turn it was set, as long as we control a Labrynth monster. So we can set the Big Welcome and we can go ahead and activate it here. This will summon the Lovely from deck and then bounce the Ariana to hand. Now, since a monster left the field by a trap card effect, Lovely will trigger to destroy a card on the field or in the hand. So we can just go ahead and pop any random card out of our opponent's hand. And then we can use Lovely effect to set the Big Welcome here. And then during the opponent's turn, we can, during draw phase or whatever, use the Big Welcome again to summon Lady. This will bounce Lady to hand, which will then trigger Lovely again to rip another card. So we've ripped 2 cards. And what we can do is immediately after this, we can just summon back the Lady. And we got all of this off of 2 cards, right? So we potentially have maybe 3 more back row in addition to hand traps here. So we've ripped 2 cards and we still have plenty of interaction left. So this can be pretty scary if your deck plays a lot of like normal spells that you can't just, you know, quick play during the standby phase, or if your deck relies on 2 card combos, 3 card combos in order to play. So this is something that you need to look out for against this deck. And then next, I want to talk about how this deck can search any normal trap card before you get to your main phase. So there's ways to search like D-Barrier or Eradicator that can just completely blow you out before you even get the chance to play. And much like the last combo, there are plenty of hands that can get you there. This is just one example where it's like, you know, Ariana plus a Welcome. This can be any chainable trap, I think. And then access to Big Welcome. So, for example, let's just use Ariana to grab the Clock. We're going to use the Stovey to set the Big Welcome here. And then this will add the Clock back to hand so that we can activate the trap card that we search on our opponent's turn. Next, we can Big Welcome for Lady, bounce the Ariana, summon back the Stovey since we bounced a card, and then we can set whatever trap card we have that is any normal trap that we can use to just trigger Lady effect. So for example, we can activate Welcome or whatever. Set D-Barrier, Eradicator, any blowout normal trap. And basically from here, we can just activate Clock whenever we want, and then immediately activate whatever trap card it is during our opponent's draw phase. So they haven't even gotten to their main phase yet, and we can use whatever blowout cards we want. So I know that this looked like a 3-card combo, and it technically is a 3-card combo, but this deck can do this very easily. There are tons of hand combinations that do this. So don't expect this to be like, oh, he got lucky moment, because it's actually very consistently accessible. So D-Barrier, complete blowout against a lot of decks. Eradicator, also the same thing. So you just, you gotta be aware of these things. The best place to interrupt it is pretty much just, hold all of your interruptions for the big welcome. Or you can try to chain block the lady with maybe like a Bystial or something, or a DD Crow or whatever. Even Ghost Bell also works against the big welcome. So there are ways to stop it. There's multiple ways you can stop it. So basically you kind of have to do whatever you can just to not get debarriered right away. So Labrynth, in general, the two boss monsters are crazy. They are basically just infinite advantage. Lady searches a trap every turn. Lovely sets a trap from the graveyard every turn. It can search any normal trap card in the game. These are just really annoying boss monsters to deal with, because they also not only have really good effects, they also have really big stats. Get used to seeing Debarrier and Eradicator. Do absolutely everything you can to not let your opponent just search these and activate them before you even get to play the game. You should also be aware that there are two different builds of the deck. One of them is the furniture style that plays more combo with hand traps, which I think you're more likely to see nowadays. And it is more adept at doing these combos that I just showed you. But at the same time, there's also just the standard trap floodgate build that plays 30 trap cards and sets 5 and passes and tells you good luck. So the engine can snowball very quickly. This deck, along with Runick, is probably a good reason to put Cosmics in your side. I think Cosmics are very, very good right now. And it's basically the only back row deck in the format other than Traptrix, but Traptrix isn't super popular, so basically make sure you have some kind of answer to this deck, or else you're just going to get blown out. If you're playing against Furniture, they have pretty good hand trap space, so expect maybe 1 to 2 hand traps against Furniture. Alright, let's go ahead and get another Snooze Fest Bedge deck out of the way. We're going to be talking about Branded. So Branded has like 10 million different combo lines that uses a whole bunch of different random one-ofs that can do anything in the game, I guess. So even just a hand that's like Aluber can do a bunch of different combo lines. So it was really hard for me to like pick one that I wanted to show as like an example. Because obviously they can just do Mirror Jade Pass with like Branded in red or whatever. Everybody knows that. So I wanted to show off something that utilizes the new cards with Quim. So this is like a newer combo that you might not be aware of, that you can do off of just Aluber. I want to make Branded interesting, but it's really not. So what we're going to do is we're going to normal Aluber. We're going to use Branded Fusion to get the Lubellion and the Albaz to make Albion. We can then use Albion to banish the Aluber from our field and the Albaz from the grave to summon Lubellion. Lubellion will then pitch whatever card to make the Mirror Jade. Now we want to keep the Albion on field because we're going to tribute it away for the Bystial Lubellion, which will get us a Branded continuous spell or trap. Now, are some people that still play things like Beast and Retribution? So during the end phase, we're going to get Albion effect. Now this will add the opening to hand, right? We don't want to set it, we want to add it to hand. So that's still during the end phase, we can go ahead and activate it, which will summon a Quim. This is one of the newer cards that does a lot of stuff. We're going to use the Quim to get the Blazing Cartesia in the graveyard. Now during our opponent's turn, we can use Mirror Jade effect to send a card from the extra deck to the graveyard to banish a monster our opponent controls, which will then trigger the Quim, because if a card leaves the extra deck, you can target a Fallen of Albaz or a monster that mentions it in your graveyard and special summon it. So we wanted to leave the Cartesia in the grave so that we can now summon it back. And what this will do is let us fusion summon during our opponent's main phase into a Granguinal. So now we get the Branded Lost trigger and the Granguinal trigger, which will grab the Mercurier off of Lost, and you can send whatever you want here off of the Granguinal. One cool thing is that you can actually use Malong. So you can, if your opponent summons a monster you want to get rid of, you can just chain Cartesia, and then go through this whole line to send Malong, and Malong, if it's sent to the graveyard, you can target a face-up card your opponent controls and return it to the hand. So it's another form of interruption, right? So just off of the Aluber, we get the Mirror Jade Banish, the Mercurier, and the Granguinal, send whatever you want. Could be a disruption or whatever. And then I forgot to put another Albion in my extra deck, but off of the Mirror Jade, they're probably going to send another copy of Albion instead of Lubellion, which of course will then, during the end phase, grab them another copy of Branded Fusion. So the deck does a lot of weird things. It's not easy to interact with. It has a lot of recursion as well. You know, I think this is probably the most interesting branded combo. I feel like I've seen this a million times already. I don't know about you guys. Alright, now, unfortunately, the deck still has pretty easy access to Gimmick Puppet Lock. You can do it with something just as simple as Cartesia plus Branded Fusion, or Aluber plus Fusion Deployment to summon Cartesia. There's multiple ways to get there. It might be a bit easier than you would expect, I think. It's a bit easier than I expected it to be, because you can do it just with these two. So we can normal Cartesia, activate Branded Fusion. We're going to dump the Albaz. You can dump whatever dark you want here. Aluber's a good one because you can reborn it and trigger its effect. So we're going to make the Lubellion. We can then Lubellion Chainlink 1, Cartesia Chainlink 2. This will fusion into the Granguinal, and then we can shuffle back these cards from the grave to make the Albion. Now, on a new chain, we get the Granguinal effect to send a level 6 or higher light or dark from the deck or extra deck to the graveyard. And wouldn't you know it, Gimmick Puppet Nightmare is a level 6 or higher dark monster. So this is an alternate way they get to Gimmick Puppet, besides just dumping it off of Branded Fusion. So be aware that this card also gets access to Gimmick Puppet as well. Right, and then of course during our opponent's turn we can just shotgun the Sanctifier, summon back the Aluber, summon the Gimmick Puppet to our opponent's field, and then we can Aluber search for whatever we want as follow-up for next turn, so that we can just kill our opponent because they can't play the game. So Branded overall, Branded Fusion accesses the entire engine, basically. There's a reason that it's a joke that this deck kind of just loses to Ash, and it's not an incorrect joke. There's a lot of hands in this deck where if your fusion does get ashed, your turn is over, and no amount of branded YouTubers are going to tell you that, you know, just play this random card and you can play through Ash. A lot of times that's just not the case. So the deck is very recursive. Things like Quim and Cartesia, Branded in Red, Branded Lost, like there's a bunch of random one-of cards in this deck that basically refuels their entire game plan. So even if you do break their board, don't expect their board to be empty for very long. It also has access to almost the entire fusion toolbox. Guardian Chimera is a insane card. Dragoon, the deck, some people still play Dragoon. A lot of decks just can't out it. You know, like Labrynth. I think Runick also can kind of struggle against Dragoon because all their stuff targets. Of course, the entire branded lineup as well. So the deck has a lot of very powerful individual cards, but all of them require maybe one or two other pieces of setup first to be good. Like branded in red is not good on its own. Cartesia doesn't really do much on its own unless you have one or two other cards that interact with it very well. Overall, the deck doesn't have much non-engine space. You might see stuff like Ash just for crossout, maybe an Imperm here or there. Some people still play Super Poly in the main deck because Super Poly is still very good in a lot of matchups. But the deck doesn't have much flex space, so mostly you're going to be playing through engine cards, like monsters and back row, whatever, things that are within the branded archetype. But don't be surprised to see Ash or Super Poly getting thrown at you every now and then. Alright, next we're going to be talking about Bystial Dragon Link, which is... it's a bit difficult to make combo guides about this deck, because while most combos kind of start off the same way as just like, oh, you know, make Striker Dragon, search Boot Sector, make Dragoonity, Romulus, search Ravine. You know, most combos are going to start that way, but then after that, they can vary greatly depending on what's in your hand. Right? Did you draw your Bystial engine? Did you draw extra extenders? Whatever. So this will be a very simple combo that uses black metal as the normal summon. There are alternate normal summons like Seifert, but this is just going to be a very general, simplistic setup for Dragon Link that gives you a decent idea about what the deck's trying to do. So we can go ahead and activate Lubellion to go get Magnemute here. You can also get Saronir, which will give you access to branded Regained as well, but which can be good in like a grindier matchup. But if you just want as much removal as possible, you can get the Magnemute, which will get the Druis Worm at the end of the turn. So there are alternate lines even with Lubellion. Next we can normal the Metal and link it off for Striker. This will trigger both of their effects, getting the Boot Sector and the Red Eyes Darkness Metal. Next we can summon the Darkness Metal by banishing the Striker, and then summon back the Black Metal Dragon. Darkness Metal is a Dark Dragon. We can tribute it off for the Lubellion here, which will grab us the Beast. So now this is what I was talking about with the Regained. Because during the end phase, if you have Regained in your graveyard, a Beast will just place it on the field. So that can give you a lot of advantage in like grindier matchups where you need to draw a bunch of cards or whatever. So that's where this being a Saronir is where the combo line differs a little bit. So next we're going to just go ahead and make Romulus, add Ravine, and from here on out we're just doing a whole bunch of regular Dragon Link stuff that, you know, we've all seen for the past 10 million years or whatever. So we dump the abs, we add Tracer, summon out Tracer with Boot Sector effect. We can go ahead and pop the Boot Sector, so now we're locked into Darks, but that's not a big deal at all. Now we can go ahead and use the Magnemute to banish a Dark monster from our grave. We can trigger the Magnemute effect to search during the end phase. Now we can go ahead and use Dispater to summon back pretty much whatever we banished off of Magnemute. Because we're just going to go straight into the Pisty. Oh. Yeah, so if you banish the black metal, then you get access to Pisty because it has to be a level 4 or lower dragon. Yeah. So now we can go ahead and make a Quad Boral here with our two monsters. Pisty effect will summon back this Tracer, and we can link these two off for Dilinjuris. Now this card's really important, because if it's destroyed, it basically just resummons itself. So what we can do is Quad Boral effect, destroy the Dilinjuris, and since it was a Link 2, we can now summon back 2 rockets from our grave. So we can bring back these two now. and Dillingerous, since it was destroyed, it will now also summon back. So from this position, we can then make our Link 5 Boral End, which this guy is a huge asshole. Cannot be destroyed by battle or card effects, cannot be targeted by monster effects, 3500 attack, and it has a quick effect negate slapped onto it that also summons a monster from the graveyard every turn, which is insane. This card, along with Dispater, basically gives you infinite cards, especially if you also have Regained as well. Like, you're drawing cards every turn, summoning things from grave, summoning things from banished. This deck gets out of hand really quick. So now we can go ahead and use the Boral End on the Recharger. It doesn't have a good effect on the field anyway, so who cares about negating it? We just summon back the Tracer here and go for the Savage. So this is our main setup here. Savage will equip the Romulus. And then during the end phase, we can summon out the Druis Worm. And Druis Worm, when it's sent from the field to the graveyard, target a special summon monster your opponent controls and send it to the grave. So this card in combination with Beast is 2 points of monster removal, in addition to your 3 negates. So you have 3 negates, 2 pieces of monster removal, and you have a ton of follow-up with a bunch of big meaty dudes on the board. And again, like I said earlier, if you searched Saronir instead of Magnamut, you would also have Regained here instead of the Druis Worm, which would still give you access to being able to use Beast to pop, because Regained summons a guy from grave. So you can just like summon back the Saronir and then use Beast to pop. So both versions are pretty valid. I think it depends on whether you want like a bit more grind with Regained, or if you're just looking to kind of end the game as quick as possible against maybe a more combo heavy strategy, because Druis Worm is super good against combo decks. This is kind of the general setup you're expecting off of this deck. So overall, it's just big boss monster deck, just summons a bunch of big dudes. They're really hard to get rid of, really recursive, things like that. Regained and Beast are insane in combination with each other. It's basically infinite advantage. And the deck plays 3 Lubellion, and I think for the most part, like 7 or 8 Bystials that aren't Lubellion, so expect to see 1 or 2 Bystials in every hand. So if your deck loses the Bystials, then I'm really sorry, but you're going to struggle against this deck. The deck has a decent amount of non-engine space, but the engine is powerful enough to play through just about anything, so even if your opponent doesn't have hand traps, there's a good chance they can still just push through your board. Since it does have decent space for non-engine, expect maybe 1 to 2 hand traps, maybe 2 if they have Regained, because they're going to be drawing a bunch of cards. The deck also really likes board breakers like Dark Ruler and Evenly, so look out for those as well. And of course, you should always expect Bystials. Never assume that they do not have a Bystial. Alright, it's time to talk about plants. So this is a deck that's just been... It's honestly really good, but the player base is so small that nobody really takes the time to learn what this deck does. And when that includes me as well, because when I was doing research for this video, I looked up Sunseed Jess's combos, to get advice from the expert. And when I was trying to reproduce the combo in order to save this replay, I messed it up like 10 times because there's so many moving parts to the combo. So if you don't know what this deck does, I think this deck is getting a bit more popular now that the power level of some of the top decks has kind of fallen down just a little bit. If you don't know what this deck does, now is the time to learn. Now, it does have a 1-card starter off of Lokai. It also has a lot of other 1 to 2 card combos as well, but the Lokai version I think is mainly what the deck revolves around, because they play a lot of cards that specifically get to the Lokai in the first place. So I'm just going to be showing you the most basic 1 card combo with the Lokai. So we can go ahead and normal summon it. There's also Unexpected Die, which can special summon it from the deck. And we can link it off for the Dryas. Now the Dryas is going to add Sunvine Sowing, which can special summon a Sunseed from the deck, and if you do, take 1000 damage. Now this card, on its own, pretty good. This card with Dryas on the field is like a +3 or something, because you summon out Twin, you take 1000, this will trigger Twin to special summon, and then this will also trigger Dryas. Because you took damage, you can summon a Sunvine from the extra deck. Right? So we're just spamming the board here, right? So just off of activating Sowing, we are now up 3 monsters on the board. So if you have Ash, this is not a bad card to Ash, because this advantage off of this 1 card is stupid. Alright, now we can go ahead and use Healer. This will gain us 300, so this deck very easily wins in time, because you can see here that we are now up 300 life points just by doing this. So, you know, be be on the lookout for that. This deck wins in time very easily. Next, we can go ahead and link off our 2 for Jasmine, and then make another Dryas here. Then we can link off the Lokai for the Healer, which will then gain us another 300, because it's not once per turn. And since we gained life points, it will now trigger Jasmine to get us a plant monster from the deck. So we're going to add Lilyboria. The combo for this deck requires a very specific order of operations, which I think is what makes this deck so difficult to play for a lot of people. It's also very difficult to comprehend for people that don't play the deck, right? So Sunvine Healer can only heal if you have Dryas on field, and Jasmine can only search if you gain life points, so it's just a lot of order of operations here. Next we can go ahead and Lily, bring back whatever, detach the material to get the Colosseum, and Colosseum will grab the Regulus. So this is how they get access to their Omni Negate here. Next, we can use Jasmine's other effect to tribute a plant to summon 1 from deck, so we're going to grab the Lone Fire. We are going to use this Lone Fire multiple times this turn. We're going to tribute the Lily because we want it off the field for Regulus, and we're going to summon Rikka Petal from deck. So now this gives us access to our entire Rikka engine as well. So next we can Regulus equip the Lily. This is why you want to tribute it off of Lone Fire. And then we can use Petal to add Mudan. Next we can make another Jasmine because this this card, the life point gain is not once per turn, so yep. So we're gonna use Twin Engrave. That's right, this deck also just has random graveyard effects that you have to look out for. Banish this card from your graveyard and a Link monster to summon Plant Link from Grave. So we're going to summon back the Healer, trigger the Healer to gain another 300, which will then trigger Jasmine yet again to grab the Snowdrop. Next we can Mudan tribute the Healer. This will get us Con-Con. Con-Con, probably the most broken card in this deck. Next we're going to make our Link 3 Melius, which basically just summons Lokai so that we can make Bengalancer. It's basically just, it's like Stardust Excel, but for plants. And for links. So we make the Bengalancer, which is a quick effect bounce. Next we're going to go ahead and grab the Con-Con here, and use the effect to set a Rikka Speller Trap from the deck. So we're going to grab Glamour. Now if they already have Glamour, they're going to grab Sheet, which is the trap card that Snatch steals. That's a card you should also be wary of. So now we can go ahead and activate the Glamour, tributing the Mudan, and since we tributed a Rikka monster, or sorry, since we also tributed a plant, we can add a Rikka monster from deck to hand. So we're going to add the Primula and the Princess. Now the Primula, since a monster was tributed, you can special summon it, and this card works the same way as Salamangreat Gazelle, where it, for some reason, it remembers that you tributed a monster off of Glamour, even after you add it, so then it still gets to special summon. It's a really weird ruling, I'm not entirely sure why it works that way, but whatever, what can you do? So we get to summon out the Primula here and the Princess, and we're going to overlay these for the Strenna. Now Strenna is really good. So we can detach a material to add back any plant from our grave to the hand. So we're going to add back the Lone Fire so that we can use it again. Next we can use Snowdrop, tributing the Strenna to summon it and the Lone Fire. So this is how we get the Lone Fire back on the field. And then Strenna, since it was tributed, it can summon a rank 5 or higher plant Xyz from the extra deck. Then you can attach this card to it as material. So this is how we get the Hyperton. So then Hyperton will get this. We can then activate the Lone Fire, chain Hyperton. This will get it another monster material. So now it has 2 monster negates. And we can summon out basically any plant from the deck. We've already been through all of our good ones basically. So a good thing to do is summon another Princess so that Princess's graveyard effect to negate a card and then shuffle it back into the deck. It means that we now basically are going to have 2 of these, one for our opponent's turn and then one for our follow-up turn. So it's just 2 extra negates in the grave, which is ridiculous. Finally, we can use Snowdrop to make both of these level 8 and then make the Teardrop. So this is the ideal end board off of our Genius Loci. Now you would like to have the trap card here as well, but you know, you can't be too picky. So if you've played against a Rikka player, I don't know, I feel like a lot of them mess up the combo and don't actually make this board every game, even if they do have the Loci and you have no hand traps. But after tinkering around with this combo and failing to do it like 10 times just to make this replay, I completely understand why it's so difficult, because the order of operations is crazy. You have to do things. You have to micromanage your zones as well. Like, it's just ridiculous the amount of memorization you have to have for this deck. And if you mess up one tiny little piece, then it can potentially kill your whole board. But this is the main thing that they're going to go for. Any experienced Rikka player is probably going to do this every game, so be mindful of that. Now, overall, this deck has very... I'm going to call it uninteractive interaction, because Con lets your opponent tribute your monsters for cost. Which means, even if you put up, like, a negate, like a, you know, if your opponent has Sheet, for example, and you have a Barone on the field, or a Spright Carrot on the field, you're like, oh, I'll just negate the Sheet. Well, they're going to tribute your negate for cost. Which means your negate is now gone, you didn't even have the chance to respond. Which makes this deck super tricky. It makes it super tricky to play through this deck's boards because of that tribute for cost. Right? And of course the Princess can also do the same thing, but from the graveyard. So there's a bunch of random things that this deck has that makes it very tricky to play through, because sometimes you might just forget that they have Princess in grave, you know what I mean? It has the really strong board presence, right? The Bengalancer bounce, the Teardrop tribute, the Hyperton negates, the Regulus negates. It has a lot of stuff that you have to push through in addition to, you know, the random Rikka stuff in the back row or in the graveyard. Of course, the floodgates in the side deck. The deck, really good at just playing Rivalry because the entire deck is plants except for Regulus. And Cactus Bouncer is searchable off of, what's it called? Rikka Glamour, yeah. So if they do something like start with Unexpected Die to get their Loci, then they can do the full combo without using their normal summon, and then just like normal summon the Cactus Bouncer at the end of their combo. And Cactus Bouncer basically says neither player can special summon, so it's basically a barrier statue that has way more attack than a barrier statue. I think it's like, yeah, it's like 1800 or something, so your deck has to have a 1900, or I guess you can trade with an 1800. But your deck has to have like a really big normal summon to get rid of the bouncer. And even then, your normal summon is probably just going to get tributed away by Teardrop or Sheet anyway. So overall, the deck has the Tribute for Cost, which is the best form of interaction in the game. A lot of varied interaction. It has bounces, tributes, negates, back row, hand traps. It has really good grind game with Con, because even if you manage to break your opponent's board, they can Con for another copy of Glamour, and then Glamour tribute one of your monsters, and then search 2 of their monsters. So they go like +3 off of Rikka Glamour, and you might get OTK'd or something. And the deck has decent non-engine space. I would expect maybe around 1 or 2 hand traps per hand. So overall, a very tricky deck to play and to play against, which is why I think that very, very experienced pilots of this deck just go on absolute tears at tournaments because they know what their deck does extremely well. Their opponents do not. And I hope that I explained this deck well enough to where you can get a general grasp on, you know, where to interact with this deck, where to use your hand traps, things like that. Alright, let's talk about mathematical mechanicals. So this deck got a decent hit on the ban list, so that Circular is now at 1, which means they have to play a lot more Searchers for Circular. And even the new Firewall sub-engine, which is also technically a 1-card combo. So they have a lot of ways to get to Circular, but the deck for the most part does revolve around Circular, which I think makes this deck very vulnerable, or more vulnerable than it was. But the ban list didn't change the combos at all, so these are just the same Mathmech combos that you've seen a million times, I think. So we're going to use Circular, we're going to dump the Sigma. Sigma effect to special summon. Circular effect to add the super factorial. Link the, or sync, or exceeds these for Aluber. Aluber effect to add diameter. Next we can normal the diameter. This will special summon back the Circular. And we can go ahead and do Splash Mage. And go into the Heat Soul here. So now this sets up Heat Soul, which will pay 1,000 to draw a card every turn. So they get 1 draw during their turn. During your opponent's draw phase or standby phase, they get to draw another card, so they're up 2 cards. They're mostly looking to draw hand traps here. And since the deck is a lot of 1-card combos, they probably will find hand traps. But at the same time, they also have the Super Factorial, which does a lot for a trap card. So for example, the Super Factorial will summon 3 Mathmechs from the grave. So you get to summon all 3 of your level 4s, and then Xyz into Laplacian. So Laplacian, when it's summoned, it can send a random card from your opponent's hand to the grave, and send 1 monster your opponent controls to the grave as well. And also the spell trap thing comes up every now and then. But since you make it with the diameter, it will also gain this effect that during this turn, it is also just a effect negation. It's like a 3-in-1 card, right? It's hand removal, field removal, and a negate just off of the Superfactorial. Also having the Heat Soul on the field, drawing a bunch of cards. So while the end board is not anything to write home about, it can surprise you with how strong just Superfactorial can be and getting all this hand advantage can be. On the other hand, we also have the Firewall combos, which can be started with just the Defensor, which is a level 4 Cyberse, which makes it searchable off of just about everything that also searches Circular. So if they already have Circular in hand, you can probably expect to see them searching this off of all their search spells. So we can normal the Defensor, link it off for Lingaribo. This will then trigger the Defensor to summon a Firewall from the deck, so we're going to grab the Guardian. Next we can make a Link 2 into Splash Mage, which will trigger the Guardian as well to summon itself back to the field. And then we can activate the Splash Mage to summon the Defensor. So now you can see where this is going. We're going to make the Aluber, which will then add us the Circular. Or if we don't have Circular, we can grab Equation or the Trap card or whatever you want. Next we can activate Circular, send Nabla here. This will then let us use the effect of Aluber to summon back the Nabla, which will then trigger the Circular to add Superfactorial. And from here, we're going to go into a new thing, which is Transcode Talker, revive Splash Mage, and then we actually make the Link 5 Firewall Dragon Dark Fluid Neo Tempest Terahertz. Yeah. So this card has one particular effect that's good about it, and it's that quick effect. You can send a Cyberse monster from your deck or extra deck to the graveyard, and this card gains 2500 attack. So this lets us like Foolish Burial Cyberse monsters every turn, which is very good, has some very good targets. One of them is this also new card, Cyberse Dessa Vworm, which is when your opponent activates a spell or trap or effect while you control a Link 4 or higher Cyberse monster, banish this card from your field or graveyard and negate that. So it's like spell trap negate from the graveyard because we control Neo Tempest. Now you might notice that we do not have 3 Mathmechs in grave for our Superfactorial. But that's fine because this is a quick effect, meaning we can just, on our opponent's turn, dump the Diameter, which now we have 3 in grave, including the Diameter to get the negate for our Superfactorial. So then this is just basically the full setup, but now we also have the Fusion in grave, which gets us a spell trap negate. So it is a tiny bit different from the, Heat Soul Pass combo. So overall, Mathmech, it's just really easy. You either do Heat Soul or you do Terahertz, and that's pretty much it. The deck doesn't have really any other game plan. But it's all 1-card starters, so the deck has really good non-engine space. Expect to see a lot of hand traps, 2 to 3, potentially more with Heat Soul, because they're going to be drawing 2 more cards before you start your turn, basically. Expect a lot of hand traps to be dropping your way, and play Bystials, so that you can just Bystial all their dudes, and you'll be good. Now we have P.U.N.K Gold Pride, a deck that has seen a pretty good uptick of success after the most recent ban list. And it's also kind of a fan favorite deck as well, so I would not be surprised to play against this at a bigger tournament. Now I've made like tons of videos about P.U.N.K stuff and Gold Pride, so like this is very redundant for me, but for a lot of you, you might not really know what these cards do, because there is a lot of random effects that you have to take into account. So we're just going to do a basic combo with Xiamen and Carry here. Xiamen, of course, being the 1-card starter for the P.U.N.K engine. So we're going to use it to add the Foxy. We can use Foxy effect, pitch a card to summon the Shirakusai. This will then go into the Rising Carp, which will then summon 2 P.U.N.K monsters from the deck, the Deer Note and the Wagon. Now, here, I'm actually going to put the life points on the screen here so you can watch our life points tick down. So now Wagon, we're going to pay 6. We are going to add the Extreme Session. Extreme Session, we're going to activate it before we make the Dragon Drive. So now we can do Dragon Drive 1 and Deer Note 2, targeting the Foxy. Alright, and since we paid life points to activate Dragon Drive's effect, we can trigger the Extreme Session to draw a card. So this effect is twice per turn, so expect to see your opponent drawing 2 cards. We can go ahead and make the Photon Lord here. The combo can vary in this position depending on what each player prefers, because rather than summoning back the Foxy Tune, they can also summon back the Shirakusai, which will give them a quick synchro on the opponent's turn into the Amazing Dragon, which will bounce, you know, a ton of cards for every level 3 Psychic with a different name you control and in your graveyard. So this is going to be bouncing 3 to 4 cards potentially. So be aware of that. They can either make the Photon Lord or the Amazing Dragon setup, but Photon Lord plays around Nibiru a bit better and also protects your Gold Pride engine from hand traps. Next, we can activate Extreme Session, banish the Wagon from grave to summon Madam Spider. Madam Spider effect, pay 6 to add the Dangerous Gabu, which is basically just a monster effect negate trap. That's about it. It's just imperm. And then, again, since we paid another 6, we can draw another card. So, you know, expect to see a lot of hand traps against this deck. Because after they thin their deck with all their engine pieces, they have a higher chance of drawing into hand traps, which is pretty good. So now we can start our Gold Pride stuff here. Since our life points are lower than our opponents, because we've already paid 3,000 this turn, we can summon out the Captain Carry, which will add us the Gold Pride Trap. This is like kind of a trap hole that also just summons a Gold Pride from deck. But it's at random. But given that they have 3 of the same monster in the deck, it's not really random anymore, is it? So we've already searched 2 back row, so this deck also has a bunch of back row you have to play through. And then we can overlay our Spider and Carry for the new Xyz monster, which can detach a material to add a Gold Pride spell card, and then Foolish Burial any monster. So I'm going to dump the Rollerballer here, because we can activate Better Luck next time, add Leon, and then we take a bunch of life points, so now we're already down to 35. And then we can activate Leon to special summon, and then Leon effect to reborn the Rollerballer. Finally, we can set our 2 trap cards, and then go to the end phase to tag out our Xyz into a carry, which will then trigger Better Luck next time, since a Gold Pride was shuffled into the deck. So now we get to draw another card. So we've drawn 3 cards, and we've set up our board. Now, what exactly does this board do? So Leon is a quick synchro using Gold Pride monsters, and Rollerballer is a quick fusion using Gold Pride monsters. So, for example, let's say our opponent summons a monster that we want to remove. We can use Leon to quick synchro into Star Leon, which has the effect that during the main phase, quick effect, target a face-up monster your opponent controls. This card gains attack. Then if your life points are lower than your opponent's, you can destroy that monster. So it's just a quick effect pop. And then after you use the quick effect pop, you can fuse Star Leon and Rollerballer into Pinballer, which, when it's summoned, can equip face-up monsters your opponent controls to it up to the number of fusion materials used. right? And if you use 2, then you get to slurp up 2 monsters into your as equip spells. So not only do we have the monster negate with Photon Lord, we have the quick pop with Leon. Pinballer is 2 more monster removals. In addition to our 2 trap cards and the 3 cards that we drew and the other cards we had in our hand at the time. So you can see that this deck has tons of like very different forms of interaction. You got front row, you got back row, you got hand row, you got everything you have to worry about against this deck. So to recap, we have the 1 card starters. Jam Session, Emergency Teleport into Xiamen is really good. Xiamen itself is a starter. You can also do things with Foxy Tune, which summons Xiamen. Xiamen adds Sharakusai, and then you can then normal summon the Sharakusai, make the fusion, and then pop off from there. So the P.U.N.K engine is full of very consistent 1-card starters. And the Gold Pride engine is also pretty good on its own as well. Even if you pay a few life points with your P.U.N.K engine, and then your monsters get negated or something, you're still at a lower life deficit, so that you can then just play with your full Gold Pride engine now. So that is very good synergy between these 2 archetypes. And of course the strong draw power, being able to draw a ton of cards every turn. And the many different types of interaction is just also very strange. It's very tricky, because you don't know when your opponent's gonna like pop something or negate something but not destroy it, or slurp it up with Pinballer. And then you got the back row you got to worry about too. So even something like Lightning Storm isn't really that effective, because you're only clearing one of the 3 rows of interaction. So it's very tricky to play through. It has a lot of different stuff going on. Pretty decent recursion and grind game thanks to the Gold Pride cards. And it draws so many cards and has decent non-engine space, so I would expect maybe around 2 to 3 hand traps if you're playing into their board as well. Next we have Super Heavy, a deck that got hit way too soon, if I'm being honest. I was actually kind of excited to play this deck with different engines, but the Scarecrow hit basically kills what was the main form of the deck, which is just hyper combo with all the machine stuff. But it's still pretty good as an engine though. But it does have a new 1-card combo that doesn't use Scarecrow, that you've probably seen already, but for the sake of the Compendium, we're gonna show it again here, because it uses a really funny card. So if we have the Wakaushi, we can use it to summon itself and grab the P.U.N.K effect to add the Soul Piercer, which we can then normal summon, and synchro into Tilting Entrainment. Now this card is going to special summon a level 4 or lower Pendulum from our hand or face up from the extra deck. So normally here you would make like, you know, an Excel or whatever, and then activate Wakaushi effect to put it in the scale. However, if you use Wakaushi to put it in the scale, then your entrainment does nothing. So basically, we're just going to go Chainlink 1, Soul Piercer, Chainlink 2, Entrainment, and we're not going to use Wakaushi effect. So we can summon out, we can grab the Soul Peacemaker here. Soul Peacemaker effect to equip to our Wakaushi, and then use the effect to tribute it to summon a Scales from deck. Scales will reborn the Soul Piercer, and we can link these 2 away for Ballista. So now we're going to get our Soul Piercer once again, along with the Ballista. So we're going to grab the Bite this time, so that we can get our level 2 Tuner. And we're going to add Box. Box effect will add the Tunneler, so this is how they get all their draw power here. Next we can use the Motorbike. to grab another Wakaushi. So this is how we are going to get our pendulum scales. Because we didn't use Wakaushi effect earlier, so we have to search our 8 scale. Next we can make Genius, so that once we do our pendulum summon, we can summon 2 monsters to the zones that our Genius points to. Now this will trigger the Genius to add a level 5 or higher machine, so we grab the Regulus. We can go ahead and use the Regulus here just to get our negate online. And we can go Excel Stardust effect, bring back the motorbike, make our Barone. Then we can use Barone to pop the Soul Piercer that was equipped to Regulus, which adds the Spy. And since we have no spells and traps in our grave, we can special summon the Spy, and then link all these away for the Appaloosa. So this is the standard end board here. But we also have the Tunneler. So we're going to use the Tunneler, shuffle back 5 of our dudes, so now we have, like, you know, we're recurring our resources. And then you just get to draw 2, which hopefully will draw you into some hand traps. Because this board on its own is pretty good, but the fact that Super Heavy can play a lot of non-engine and draw into hand traps is also a big plus. It just really sucks that this deck loses to every hand trap now because it can't really play Gamma. I mean, you technically can play Gamma, but very, very unlikely for you to draw it when you really need it. So overall, the deck still has very strong 1-card combos, but it is a lot more vulnerable to interruption now. Not having Gamma for hand trap protection, not having Scarecrow for looping Soul Piercer over and over again. But it still ends on very heavy negate boards, and it doesn't really have like spot removal or anything else. So so things like Dark Ruler, really good. Things that can't be negated, like Branded Lost into Branded Fusion is still good, but you're probably just going to negate the Lost anyway. Yeah, overall, it's a very, like, one-note board. It's just a bunch of negates. While that is good, it can be tricky to, like, play through decks that can just summon things without really activating effects, like Kashtira, right? They can just summon Unicorn, beat over your Appaloosa, and then now you only have, like, 2 more negates, and they can probably bait those out pretty easy. And again, the deck hard loses to cards that just already see play in a lot of decks. Like Droll and Dark Ruler, like, you're just cooked. You're done. And people play those cards for a lot of different decks already. So the deck is very hit or miss. It's, like, very fragile, I guess. I don't know. Just play Dragon Link. Dragon Link kind of puts up the same board, but has way more pieces of interaction and can actually play spells and traps. I don't know. You know, expect 2 to 3 hand traps with the non-engine space and with the draw power. The deck can't play Dark Ruler or Evenly, though. But you should watch out for, like, continuous trap floodgates, though. Like Anti-Spell, the deck can technically play those, as long as they stick on the board, because they can use super heavy effects on their follow-up turn as long as the Anti-Spell is still on the field and not in the graveyard. Next up, we have Swordsoul, baby. We're going to be normal summoning Moye today. Activate the effect, reveal Moye. This is a deck that's been seeing a lot of popularity lately, especially at the French Nationals, I think. There was a lot of Swordsoul players, but unfortunately a lot of them didn't really make top cut. But I don't know, if you don't know what Swordsoul does by now, I think you might just be a lost cause, or maybe you haven't played the game in so long that, you know, maybe you just haven't seen it, but it is a fan favorite deck. The pilots are very dedicated. So we're going to normal Moye, we're going to reveal a worm, summon a token, and then synchro into Chi-Shao. Then we can Chi-Shao Chainlink 1, Moye Chainlink 2. This is going to draw us a card and then search for a Swordsoul card. So we're going to grab Long Yuan. And then we're going to activate Long Yuan. summon itself and the token by pitching the other random worm or Swordsoul card. And then you just make Baron, or any other level 10 you want. You make this guy, you can make that guy, you can make this girl. There's a lot of options, but I mean, yeah, that's it. On the other hand, there are times where you just draw only Tenyi monsters and you have to try to figure out what to do. So what if you draw Ashuna with Adhara? This also works with Ashuna plus Vishuddha as well. So we're going to activate the Ashuna to special. We can link it off for the monk. And then we can use Adhara effect to special. Ashuna effect to special from the deck since we control since we control a non-effect monster. But we are now locked into worms, which means no more Baron for us. But now we have access to a level 8 Synchro, so we're going to grab Chixiao here. We can then use Chixiao effect to add the Longwan. Then we can use the Adhara, since we control a non-effect monster. We can add this Ashuna back to hand, which will then give us the material necessary to use the Longwan. So we summon that out, make our level 10. We can burn for 12. And this is what you get off of these two cards, but if your opponent has any normal summon, like, ooh, voice crack. Your opponent has any normal summon, like Moyi or Taya, or Emergence to search any of them, they can actually put up another level 8 here. Usually you'll see like a Draco Berserker, because it's just generically the most good worm level 8. Usually you should expect around 2 synchros from this deck. With a good hand, they can make 3, and you should watch out for Denglong setups, because people are still messing around with those. I haven't really been messing around with it yet, but maybe I can do a future video on that, some Denglong stuff. But overall, Swordsoul it's very simple. It's very easy to get a grasp on what this deck's trying to do, right? You make 2 synchros, and you hope and pray that it's enough. Sometimes 3 if your hand is good. The deck does have good draw power, so it can find like hand traps pretty easily, drawing into hand traps. But also, games 2 and 3, it's very good at drawing like floodgate cards, because you can draw off of Moyi, you can draw off of Qixing Longwan. The deck also plays Desires and Tactics, which both draw 2 cards. So the deck has a ton of draw power to try to find like sideboard cards, which is very scary. And of course, you have to expect, well, I wouldn't say expect. You shouldn't be surprised to maybe see a Denglong every now and then against Swordsoul, because the combos with Denglong are strong. It's just not exactly the easiest thing to really get there. Just be aware that Pillars of the Yangzing exists, and that you shouldn't just base your entire game plan on like, oh, I'll just grab Dark Ruler and it'll be GG. Because they will have a negate for it if they're playing Denglong. So it's a simple deck on paper, but the people who play Swordsoul at big events are the people that have been playing it for the past 2 years, and they're just very good at the deck. They're very experienced, and you know, those type of players, a lot like the Rikka players, you might just get stomped out of nowhere because the pilot just knows what to do in any given situation. So you should expect around 2 hand traps playing into a Swordsoul board. And you should also be aware that some people prefer like Thrust plus board breakers. So you might see like Thrust plus Tactics and Dark Ruler evenly, things like that. So it can vary a little bit whether they like hand traps more or they like board breakers more. And last and maybe least, we have Marincess, which is one of my favorite decks. I really like playing this deck. It's very adaptable. You can do a lot of funny things with it. It's also a deck that's been seeing pretty good success. Not like you know, really good or anything. Not nearly as much as Spright or Cash or Labrynth or whatever. But I don't know. I feel like you see 1 or 2 Marincess players top pretty much any event for like the past few months or so. So it's probably a deck that you need to learn, which is why I think I included it in this video, because it is pretty popular. Don't be surprised to run into this in bracket. But it is like a very basic 1-card combo deck, 2-card combo deck that plays a bunch of non-engine, and it's very adaptable. So this is going to be like a 1-card combo where they don't open any other engine, right? Which is very unlikely that this ever happens. I'm going to be honest. This is very, very unlikely, but be aware that this is what they can do off of just like the bare minimum setup, right? So we're going to normal our blue Tang, and we're going to dump our Seahorse. We can then link off for blue Slug. We can do blue Tang Chainlink 1 to excavate the top 3 cards and add a Marincess, and blue Slug will add back the Seahorse to hand. Now I'm going to purposefully whiff the excavate here just to show you that this is indeed a 1-card combo where you got really unlucky. Next we can summon the Seahorse. Go ahead and link it off for a Sea Angel. And we're going to add Dive here. Now, you don't really want to add the field spell because then you won't have enough material to make a rank or a link 4. And this deck really only functions if you get the link 4s. Because you'll see here, we can activate Dive, summon something back, make Coral. Coral bring back any random monster. And then we're going to link these 2 off for the Triangle. Now, Triangle is really good if you have, like, multiple Marincess monsters in your hand. But if you're really down bad, you still can use its effect to grab the Wave. Because we can use Coral here to add back this Seahorse. And then use Triangle, pitch the Seahorse, add Wave. So that you at least have one form of interruption, right? You don't want to end on just nothing. And then finally, we link these 2 for the Great Bubble Reef, which during each standby phase, you can banish a water from your grave and then draw a card. And that's unfortunately about all it does, right? So you get the Wave, which you can activate from hand, and it will make all of your monsters unaffected for the turn. And during standby, you can grab a... you can banish a monster. You probably don't want to banish the Coral. You probably want to banish, like the Sea Angel or something. So you get to draw a card. Now, given the scenario that I set up here, I'm assuming that the rest of your hand is also non-engine, right? Because we didn't have any extenders. So you have to play through Wave and a whole shit ton of non-engine. So just a bunch of hand traps that you have to play through. Now, on the other hand, we have the 2-card combos that you can do with a lot of hands can set up a board like this. But since you have so much good access to things like blue Tang and whatnot, it's not very hard to find the blue Tang. So this is going to be the kind of setup that you're going to see most Marincess games, right? Like maybe 80 or 90% of the time, you're going to see this. So we're going to follow the same steps as last time, except we're going to dump a Mandarin here. We're going to add back the blue Tang, and I'm going to purposefully whiff the Excavate once again, just to keep things easy. Next we can summon the Seahorse, link it off into the Angel, and now we can grab the Field Spell because we no longer need that extender. And the Field Spell helps out a lot for this deck. Next we can summon the Mandarin. If we control 2 or more Marincess monsters, we can summon it to a link zone they point to. So Sea Angel points over here. Next we can link off into the Coral. Coral effect, summon back anything. Go into the Triangle. Triangle, add back the Seahorse. And we get to keep this blue Tang in our hand for follow-up. Because we can just pitch the Seahorse off of Triangle to grab Wave. And then we can go ahead and make our Aqua Argonaut. Now we want to use our Battle Ocean to equip 3 of our links to the Argonaut. So now it will be 43, and its main effect is during your opponent's turn when a spell, trap, card, or effect is activated on the field, you can special summon one of your Marincess monsters equipped to this card, and if you do, negate that effect. So we get a spell trap negate, as well as a monster negate, as well as follow-up for the next turn, in addition to having access to a lot of non-engine in this deck. So it's a bare minimum of two negates, followed up by hand traps. The deck can also put up rank 4s like Kragan or Toad if their hand is really good. Yeah, like Kragan or Bahamut into Toad, things like that. And also the new Ice Jade card. They can actually make things like Chengying and Ice Jade Gamir. So this deck has access to some synchros now too, which is really funny. So this is the most basic of basic, boring setup this deck can do. But still pretty powerful if you can't out a Argonaut that is made unaffected by Wave. So overall, Marincess, extremely consistent setup. Expect at least one monster negate with Wave and a spell trap negate with Argonaut pretty much every game. Sometimes you can expect more, right? If they have Spring Girl and Pascalis, it's very common to set up things like a Kragan or a Bahamut Toad. And Kragan in combination with Gozen is a ridiculous lock, because Kragan makes every monster on the field water, and Gozen locks you into waters. So if you summon one monster, it becomes water, they flip Gozen, and given that the rest of the monsters in your hand are not water, which, I mean, this is the only water deck in the format, so this is probably not going to be water. Yeah, you might just be toast. You might be cooked. Also, you need to worry about the going second board wipe with Zealantis, because this deck historically kind of struggled a little bit with going second and breaking boards. But Zealantis kind of fixes all that, because you can use Coral effect, which now locks you into only being able to special summon waters. And when Zealantis uses its effect to banish the entire field and then summon everything back, you cannot summon your opponent's monsters that are not water. So you can summon back all of your water monsters, but if your opponent's monsters were not water, they stay banished forever. So it's a very easy board wipe setup that the deck can do off of 1 or 2 cards, which is really nice. So, you know, be aware that going second, they're probably going to be trying to do that. But overall, it's very adaptable. It has a ton of non-engine space, so they can kind of fix their deck in a way that beats all of their bad matchups. Expect 2 to 3 hand traps per hand, potentially more with Bubble Reef, as well as things like Tactics, Thrust. Thrust is really good in this deck. I played Thrust in this deck a few weeks ago at Locals, and that card went crazy. But overall, that is the gist of Marincess. So very simple but very effective. Okay, 3 things I want to talk about real quick. So we have Purrely, Tearlament, and Vanquish Soul. So these were a little difficult to include because they're very, well, at least for Purrely and Tear, they're very non-linear. They're kind of RNG based, so there isn't like a definitive combo that I can really show. Purrely has the Excavate, how do you spell Purrely? There you go. My Friend is like also kind of RNG now that Delicious is at 1, so it's very hard to talk about this deck, but the general game plan is that they're trying to set up a Noir going first that is unaffected by having 5 or more materials, which used to be pretty easy with Delicious being very easily searchable. Now it's very hit or miss, and Sleepy Memory, basically letting them draw a bunch of cards. For all of these decks, there's probably some better guide videos out there that would be better examples than what I'm showing or what I'm going to talk about here, so I would suggest that. For Tearlament, you should know that a lot of them are just on, like, from what I've seen, they're kind of trap-based. Like, I think they play all the traps, like, things like Scream. They also use Beatrice a lot because of Malicious. Overall, it's just another thing to look out for. And Vanquish Soul is also hard to talk about because it's not really a combo deck, right? Like, you might see something... I mean, the most combo they really have is just like something like this. Normal Rosin, add this, make a rock, special from hand, and then add like either Dust Devil or Continue. And then it really just relies on whatever else they have in their hand, like Borger or Caesar. So that's not really a combo deck that I can show like combo lines, but just be aware that this exists, and it's another one of the decks that I would try to learn a bit more about before you go to a big event.